In the United Kingdom, during the year 2000, a fuel protest developed over the rising cost of gasoline and diesel, with truckers, farmers, and the general public forming blockades at oil refineries and fuel depots, disrupting all systems reliant upon oil. Day 1 brought about panic at the gas pumps. Day 2 brought about panic at the supermarkets. On day 3, the panic turned ugly, provoking the soundbite heard around the world. Civilization is only 9 meals away from anarchy, stated by Lord Cameron of Dillington after bearing witness to the perilous conditions unfolding in the United Kingdom as food and fuel began to disappear. Appointed head of the Countryside Agency in 1999, Lord Cameron's alarm resonates with a fear that the veneer of order, complacency, and civilization depends on food being readily and effortlessly available, which in turn hangs on the threads of transit routes that can be shut down on a moment's notice. Chain reactions would ensue with frightening speed thanks in part to both the short timeline from disruption to collapse of a logistics system and the short fuse from civility to civil breakdown when food runs out. Now, the just-in-time delivery system, otherwise known as JIT, J-I-T, is a logistical production strategy to improve a business's return on investment by reducing in-process inventory. The larger the inventory, the more money will be tied up and utilized in purchasing, storing, and insuring those goods. Not to mention there is the risk of losing money should the inventory lose its shelf life. Now, the problem with JIT is that it leaves suppliers and downstream consumers open to supply shocks and demand changes. So let's examine a few historical examples. Major economic reforms in Russia during the early 1990s sparked social and political turmoil as the country began to move to a regulated market system. The price of food and other consumer commodities began to double in price and led to panic buying, hoarding, and shortages. Statistical data from the era has shown that Russia far outpaced the United States in production of several major food products, which begs the question as to why such food shortages were occurring. Well, trade wars had erupted and paralyzed food shipments as each city and republic tried to retain whatever it produced. The larger cities became the victims of blockades by the rural regions, who were resentful that food sales in the cities were now limited to the residents of those cities. And fuel shortages ensued and slowed or stopped the trucking and railroad industry. The system of transport, storage, and distribution of consumer goods had virtually disintegrated, and panic buying prevented the restoration of any balance to the marketplace. The 2003 Northeastern Blackout was the largest power outage in U.S. history, affecting 55 million residents of Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Vermont, and Canada. Entire commuter and freight rail operations ceased to exist. Air traffic was brought to a standstill. Traffic signals, message signs, tunnel lighting, and ventilation systems and pumps to control flooding in depressed roadways failed to operate. Traffic management, that took a secondary priority in many areas as emergency service personnel focused their efforts on freeing individuals trapped in elevators or dealing with life-threatening situations. Minutes after New York City lost its power, 490 million gallons of raw sewage began to flow into the surrounding waterways of the Hudson River, East River, and New York Harbor due to non-functioning backup generators. In Detroit, Michigan, and Cleveland, Ohio, the loss of water pressure permitted bacteria growth to form in the municipal water supply. Vinyl chloride was released into the waterways of Ontario, Canada. And in Cleveland, all 4 of the city's water pumping stations went down at once, leaving 1.5 million residents without water. In Detroit, backup generators could not produce sufficient pressure, leaving 4.3 million residents without water. A supply shock ensued as jugs of water sold out immediately across the region, as an estimated 50 million people were without water, either due to contamination concerns or just shortages in general. In Russia, during the year 2010, a severe drought and wildfire in the western region destroyed 20% of the country's crops. A ban on the export of wheat occurred in an effort to curb the rising cost of domestic grain products, and with Russia being one of the largest grain producers in the world, the ban initiated a supply shock and led to high food prices and shortages on the global market, affecting many nations reliant on grain imports. In May of 2011, the deadliest tornado in the U.S. since 1953 razed Joplin, Missouri to the ground, killing 158 and injuring 1,150 people. An estimated 30% of the town was damaged or destroyed as the tornado cut a 6-mile long and nearly 1 mile wide path through the downtown, striking hospitals, department stores, nursing homes, houses, schools, and entire apartment complexes. Residents of Joplin and those in the greater metropolitan area faced food shortages due to the inevitable panic buying in the aftermath, compounded with power outages and damage to the transportation network and other infrastructures. In 2011, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake occurred off of the coast of Japan, triggering a tsunami with waves of up to 133 feet in height, traveling 6 miles inland. The earthquake and tsunami caused extensive and severe structural damage in Japan, which included heavy damage to roads and railways, in addition to the meltdown of 3 nuclear reactors at Fukushima. A humanitarian crisis ensued as the natural disasters shocked to the supply system disrupted the flow of food to the marketplace. A change in the consumer demand manifested itself in the form of panic buying, further crippling the just-in-time delivery system. In 2012, the second costliest hurricane in the history of the U.S., as well as being the largest Atlantic hurricane on record, occurred, which was known as Hurricane Sandy. The food supply chain from the farm to the fork and spoon were affected. Producers and distributors struggled to keep their products moving as power outages, flooding, damage, and fuel shortages made food disruption difficult or impossible. And many grocery store and supermarket shelves just went barren. In January 2014, a chemical spill occurred at a Freedom Industries facility in Charleston, Virginia, polluting the Elk River and leading to a ban on the usage of tap water for drinking, cooking, washing, or bathing. This affected over 300,000 residents in 9 counties. Panic buying ensued as area residents flocked to the stores and stripped the shelves barren of bottled water and disposable eating utensils and dishware. On February 14, 2014, the Guardian reported a wave of violence and looting in Central Africa, forcing shopkeepers to leave in a mass exodus, which left local residents to confront food shortages and soaring prices. With the mass exodus, the economy went into rapid decline, made worse by the violence on the roads that have all but cut the cities off from outside supplies. Now, one does not have to look for such occurrences such as political turmoil, droughts, wildfires, tornadoes, earthquakes, meltdowns, chemical spills, civil unrest, tsunamis, or hurricanes to fully understand how volatile and easily disrupted JIT, just-in-time delivery, can become. A weather forecast of a small winter storm will quickly exhaust basic consumer commodities at a grocery store or supermarket, taking retailers up to 3 days to recover from these run-on supplies. Now, Crystal Jones, who is a transportation specialist in the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Freight Management and Operations, wrote a 2007 article entitled Perspective on Freight Congestion. This article dictated that the trucking industry transports 2/3 of the goods within the United States, comprising 60% of the total tonnage of everything manufactured, bought, or consumed. Furthermore, Jones specified that the U.S. the U.S. rail and highway transportation networks are reaching or have reached full capacity, causing congestion and threatening the supply chain with a ripple effect of shortages and increased cost to those who participate in the sale, delivery, and production of product. So this demonstrates the fragility of the transportation network systems both in the U.S. and abroad for that matter during normal and daily operations without the interference of natural or man-made disasters. On July 14, 2006, a study was published by the American Trucking Association, known as the ATA, detailing the consequences of travel disruption within the trucking industry. The ATA, founded in 1933, is the largest national trade association for the industry, representing its members before Congress, the executive branch, the judicial branch, and regulatory agencies. This published study is called When Trucks Stop, America Stops. Now, focusing on the aspect of food, this publication noted that an average fuel service station requires a delivery every 2.4 days. And based upon these statistics, the ATA reported that the busiest service stations could run out of fuel within hours of a truck stoppage, and the remaining stations following within 1 to 2 days. The ripple effect that follows a fuel shortage among many areas would include the disruption in the production, processing, and transportation of food to the marketplace. Now, the ATA reported in that publication that significant food shortages will occur in as little as 3 days if the trucking industry is non-operational due to any number of occurrences. Hospitals and nursing homes will exhaust their food supplies within 48 hours. During emergencies, consumer behavior does triple the rate of inventory turnover as fear and panic exacerbate shortages, ultimately leading, according to the ATA, to civil unrest. Now, as reported by Lord Cameron, if supermarket shelves remain barren for 3 days due to shipment disruptions, law and order would begin to break down and chaos would emerge from within the population. A complete change in the psychological and sociological behavior of an individual will occur, with the emergence of a primitive and primal-like behavior developing. The need to feed overwhelming ethics, morals, and lawfulness. Let's examine why that occurs. In 1954, a psychologist by the name of Abraham Maslow wrote a book called Motivation and Personality, in which he expressed what he referred to as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, this is an organizational format used to understand the psychology of human needs, consisting of 5 stages of growth. The first stage is physiological, pertaining to the most basic of fundamentals required for human existence, specifically oxygen, shelter, water, and food. Safety is the secondary stage, relating to personal safety and security, financial security, and health and well-being. The third developmental stage is love, which is the desire of wanting to be accepted within or to belong to other social groups such as family, intimate partners, or friends. The fourth stage is esteem, focusing on having respect for oneself and the desire to be respected by others. Self-actualization is the fifth and final stage, in which a human realizes their full potential in life and then strives to achieve it. Now, according to Maslow, each stage must be fulfilled before progressing onward, as each level forms the foundation and builds upon the next. And if a human being is unable to feed themselves, all other stages of developmental growth will not matter, as the need to feed becomes the driving force to satisfy the physiological level, with little regard to morals, ethics, laws, or consequences of actions undertaken to fulfill that requirement. And long throughout history, a coexistence of this behavior and hunger, or even the foreshadowing of food deprivation, have sparked this reactionary response to resolve or prevent the hollowness of an empty stomach. In 1918, the rise in the cost of rice in Japan caused extreme economic hardship, especially in the rural areas where rice was the main staple of life. The Japanese government drove the price higher through the purchasing of existing rice stocks to support troops sent to Siberia during the time period of 1918 to 1922, which was around the time of the Bolshevik Revolution. The 1918 rice riot began as a peaceful protest in a small fishing town, but quickly escalated into full-scale riots, lootings, and incendiary bombings of police stations and government offices, spreading to many other towns and cities. Now, that riot was unparalleled in modern Japanese history in terms of the size and violence, but it was initiated by the threat to the food security of the Japanese people. Now, the Great Depression was the longest, deepest, and most widespread economic disaster of the 20th century, affecting nations worldwide, both rich and poor. And it began in 1929 and lasted until the late 1930s, or in some nations until the middle 1940s. International trade plunged more than 50%. Unemployment in the United States rose to 25%, and as high as 33% in other countries. Personal income levels also suffered greatly during this time. In February of 1931, several hundred men and women in St. Paul smashed the windows of a grocery store and looted the fruit, canned goods, bacon, and ham. And the store's owner retrieved a firearm in an attempt to protect his property, but was tackled by the mob and had his arm broken. In Harlan County, Kentucky, coal miners were being subjected to unfair business practices by mine owners, unsafe working conditions, deeply rooted corruption within the local government, and the wages of the miners were just above the poverty line. Now, only after the wages of the coal miners were reduced to 10% below the poverty line did the miners go on strike, stating, "I would rather strike and starve than work and starve." The local sheriff, John Henry Blair, had allied himself with the local tyrants and led a private army of mine guards with full deputy privileges who exercised their powers with impunity as they terrorized and victimized the protesting miners, strike leaders, union leaders, and the families of all those involved. On May 5, 1931, the Battle of Everts occurred when miners ambushed 3 trucks full of heavily armed deputies and guards who were heading to Everts, stating that they would, quote, "clean up the whole town." 3 deputies and 1 miner died in the gun battle, and the county of Harlan entered a state of siege. Schools and mines were closed, and random sniper fire erupted for days later. And all of this chaos began when wages were reduced and the miners had greater difficulty in affording to purchase food for themselves and their families. Irving Bernstein, a political science professor at the University of California, as well as being a noted labor historian, reported that by 1932, organized looting of food stores was a nationwide phenomenon, though the media reported on this less and less, afraid of the contagious effect it might have amongst the unemployed and poverty-stricken. During the Dutch famine of 1944 to 1945, shipments of food and fuel were cut off to Western Holland by the German military for punishment in not participating in the Nazi war effort. In the book, The Hunger Winter, Occupied Holland 1944 to 1945, the author, Henry A. van der Zee, recounted his experiences as a child, and the following are excerpts from this publication. "In any village it was bad, but in the bigger cities it was worse. Now that food from official sources was hardly to be expected, it was up to the individual Dutchman to go out and get what he needed. Many in despair began to loot. They steal whatever they can, and all the shops have now put up their shutters as their windows have been smashed. Theft, assault, and plundering are the order of the day. It is devastating to discover that a human being is so little different from an animal, and in the end consists of only a stomach plus some instincts and tools. The difference between mine and thine has disappeared. School children are sent into the streets with orders to steal. As long as hunger and cold rule, those who are in need follow the law of life, the urge to stay alive and try to defeat every obstacle in the way. The conclusion was unavoidable. This has to be done by means which are in conflict with normal standards of morality. In 1977, the president of Egypt announced the ending of government subsidies on flour, rice, and cooking oil with the addition of canceling state employee bonuses and wage increases. These new policies resulted in the increase of the cost of food by 50%, sparking civil unrest by the lower class who were the hardest hit. The rioting ensued for 2 days and ended when the government abruptly canceled these new policies. Although 79 people had already perished, 556 were injured and over 1,000 were arrested. Between May and June of 1989, civil unrest occurred in Argentina due to hyperinflation from failed economic policies and shortages of food. Riots began in Rosario, the third largest city of the country, where Argentinians demanded that supermarkets just give away their food. Rioters ranging in groups of 20 to 1,000 people raided and looted grocery stores and businesses, prompting a national emergency as the civil unrest spread to other cities. During the Bosnian Civil War on April 5, 1992, the siege of Sarajevo began, lasting until February 29, 1996, in what has been called the longest siege of a capital city in the history of modern warfare. Bosnian Serb forces established a total blockade of the city, severing access roads, shutting off public utilities, and disrupting the flow of supplies, which included food. Now, a survivor of the siege, known anonymously as Selko, created a website called SHTF School, whereby he is taught and discussed everything he learned from his experiences during this time period. And during an interview, Selko painted the very grim reality of how the population responded when faced with starvation and deprivation by making the following statement. Anyway, after 1 month or two, gangs started with their nasty job. The hospital looked like a butchery. The police force vanished. 80% of the hospital staff went home. I was lucky. My family was big at that time. 15 members in one big house. So we lived and survived. Most of us. In a situation like that, a lot of things change. Most people turn into monsters. It was ugly. Strength was in numbers. If you were alone in a house, you would have been robbed and killed, no matter how well armed. There were organized groups of gangs, 10 to 15 people, sometimes even 50. There were also normal people, like you and me, fathers, grandfathers, and decent folks, but who robbed and killed. I think I have strength to do whatever it takes to keep me and my family alive. Because when everything is going to shit, you're going to have to do bad things to save your kid. You don't want to be a hero. You want to survive with your family. World food prices increased dramatically in 2007 and 2008, creating a global crisis and causing political and economical instability and social unrest in both poor and developed nations. So let's take a look at a few examples. Days of rioting left 5 people dead in Haiti, including a UN peacekeeper, forcing the resignation of Haiti's prime minister. Food prices in the country had increased between 50 to 100%. Rice became so valuable in Thailand that thieves began stealing it out of the fields at night, so the military was used to prevent food theft. 28 people were injured after 10,000 workers in Bangladesh rioted in the capital, demanding higher wages to cover the cost of a fast increasing cost of food. Rice prices had doubled in that previous year. Bandits in Trinidad hijacked and looted 2 vans carrying flour, milk, and juice as the prices rose across the supermarkets in the country. The price of rice in Egypt had more than doubled, and fighting in long bread lines have left 6 people dead. Rioters are demanding an increase in minimum wage to offset the higher cost of living. Soaring food prices in the United Arab Emirates caused hundreds of workers to protest for higher wages. Cars and offices were set on fire by the protesters. Union marches in Senegal occurred due to the spiraling cost of basic food staples and unemployment, leading to clashes with police and at least 24 people arrested. Wheat export restrictions by Pakistan have caused the price of rice to double in Afghanistan, leading to smuggling and, of course, civil unrest. Food riots in 3 major cities in Burkina Faso erupted in February, with protesters attacking government offices and burning stores, cars, and gasoline stations. 100 people were arrested for stoning government officials. Among the rioters were merchants and traders who protested the taxes and increasing cost of goods. 34 people were sentenced to prison in Morocco for participating in food riots, followed by which was instigated by a 30% increase in the rise of cost of bread. Riots paralyzed the capital of Cameroon following 4 days of rioting in several western towns in the wake of taxi drivers protesting over the increased cost of fuel and food. Human rights activists estimated a death toll of over 100 after police fired into a crowd of people. The price of bread and other staple foods in Yemen doubled over 4 months, provoking demonstrations and riots that killed over a dozen people. Thousands rioted in Pakistan after the price of wheat flour doubled in less than a week, and the army was utilized to guard grain supplies and to crack down on hoarding and smuggling while the government issued ration cards. More than 10,000 people rioted in the streets of Indonesia after soybean prices doubled that year. Food inflation in China reached 18.2%, leading to deadly stampedes as individuals were trampled to death while attempting to obtain cooking oil at reduced prices. Food rioting in Guyana ensued over the rise in the cost of food and other living expenses, leading to the deaths of dozens of workers on a general strike. Now, these historical references have demonstrated that lawlessness and chaos will emerge when a population faces food insecurity, thereby confirming Lord Cameron's statement in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. However, these examples have not touched upon a much darker side of human psychology when faced with starvation, and that is the emergence of cannibalism. In 1944, Dr. Ansel Keys began an experiment at the University of Minnesota in an effort to develop a rehabilitation and rescue strategy for the citizens of Europe recovering from the aftermath of World War II, studying both the physical and psychological effects of diet changes and starvation. Now, the study was divided into 3 phases for the 36 male participants. A 12-week control phase where the physiological and psychological observations were collected to establish a baseline for each subject. A 24-week starvation phase during which the caloric intake of each subject was reduced by half, causing each participant to lose an average of 2.5 pounds per week, equaling 25% of their pre-starvation body weight. And finally, a 20-week recovery phase in which various rehabilitative diets were tried to re-nourish the volunteers. Physical activity was expected to be performed by the participants. They walked 20 miles per week, 1 mile each day on a treadmill, while their body functions were monitored, and 2 miles per day to walk to the cafeteria. They were provided 2 meals per day consisting of food of a typical European survivor or refugee, refugee what they might obtain, such as potatoes, turnips, bread, pasta, and rutabagas. Now, the results of the experiment showed that all participants experienced severe psychological side effects. Everyone lost their ability to concentrate, form rational thoughts, make sound judgments, or comprehend the world around them. They exhibited severe mood swings, they were easily angered and irritated, and preferred isolation and developed severe depression. One participant proceeded to chop off 3 of his fingers with an axe. Another participant by the name of Frank Watkins was caught stealing food, and Frank threatened to kill the doctors and commit suicide. Watkins later admitted that he had a desire to trap and eat elderly people and, quote, lunatics. On June 24th, 1945, William Anderson, another test subject, wrote in his journal, quote, "I think about how cannibalism is a terrible option for a starving person, but I can't stop thinking about it." End quote. On July 8, 1945, Anderson wrote, quote, "Cannibalism, death through starvation, grass, salad, and eating garbage are more than fleeting thoughts." End quote. All of these men were perfectly healthy, both physically and mentally. They were willful participants in a controlled experiment where they knew when it would begin, when it would end, what would occur, and the fact that they knew that they would not die, and they could leave anytime they desired to. Despite this, dreams and fantasies of cannibalism were present in every single test subject. Now, this did not come as a surprise to Dr. Keyes, because he knew that famine and starvation in any region of the world at any time period has always brought forth cannibalism. Let's look at a few historical examples. In colonial Jamestown, the colonists resorted to cannibalism during the years 1609 to 1610 when their food supplies were exhausted. They began digging up the corpses for food, and it's reported that one man killed his pregnant wife, salted her, and then ate her. In 1846, the Donner Party, consisting of 87 American pioneers, set out from Missouri to California, and in order to facilitate a timely arrival at their destination before the onset of winter, the group attempted to travel through a region known as Hastings Cutoff, and the group found their progress to be exceptionally slow by having to engage in heavy physical labor to clear a pathway for their wagons. While planning to arrive in California by September, it was now November, and the onset of an early winter brought the progress to a complete halt in Nevada. Their food provisions eventually became depleted, and wild game was not in enough abundance to sustain the entire party. And open discussions were held among the entire party that someone should volunteer to be sacrificed, or a lottery system to be put in place to randomly select a person for execution so that the body could be cannibalized. Now, there are conflicting reports concerning the cause of death of several people who were eaten, some saying the deaths were natural, some saying there were accidents, others alluding to the possibility of murder. Now, the Russian famine of 1921 killed an estimated 6 million people along the Volga and Ural River region, resulting from economic disturbances attributed to World War I and the Russian Revolution of 1917. Inefficient usage of a rail system to transport food products and a severe drought in 1921 further aggravated the situation. American aid was eventually accepted, but this humanitarian generosity was being motivated by the disturbing accounts of widespread cannibalism among the starving and desperate, made public to the world through accounts and photographs taken or collected by relief workers, visitors, journalists, and news correspondents. In 1933, a man-made famine struck the Ukraine and killed up to 7.5 million people, and this was all implemented by Joseph Stalin's policies on the implementation and enforcement of communist collectivism. Now, this savage piece of human engineering was designed to eliminate an economic class that the communists viewed as their opponents. The Soviet leadership despised the millions of peasant farmers who took their place, maintaining small farms, and they were producing product for sale and personal consumption. Now, such farmers were a threatening example of self-reliance in capitalism. Communist authorities used force and terror for the implementation and conversion of private to collective farming, with grain quotas which left many peasants and farmers with very little, very little to sustain themselves. And those who hid grain or other food items were typically executed. This became known as Holodomor, with widespread cannibalism and more than 2,500 people being convicted of it. People were living off of the remains of other starvation victims, or in some instances resorting to murder. Most peasant families had 5 or 6 children, and unfortunately, some mothers killed their weakest children in order to feed the others. In the summer of 1941, German forces reached the Soviet city of Leningrad, and instead of engaging in urban warfare, Adolf Hitler ordered the city to be encircled and supply lines severed to starve the population. Now, only through Lake Ladoga was a limited resupply to the city possible. Now, the siege lasted from September 1941 to January 1944 for a total of 2 years and 4 months. All existing food supplies in the city were largely exhausted within the first few weeks. All restaurants were closed, money became obsolete, and starvation-level food rationing was instituted by means of a ration card system. The bulk of the rations that were distributed from November 1941 to February 1942 were nothing more than sawdust bread. All the animals from the city zoo were consumed, followed by dogs, cats, rats, birds, and other animals. Wallpaper paste made from potatoes happened to be scraped off the walls and eaten. Leather was boiled to produce an edible jelly. And people did not stop at eating pets, strays, rodents, and glue. In the winter of 1941 to 1942, acts of cannibalism began to emerge, numbering in the thousands. Roving gangs preyed upon lone pedestrians to murder them for their flesh. And many of the bodies that were brought to the cemeteries were missing body parts that were consumed for food. Meat patties made from minced human flesh went on sale in the Leningrad Haymarket in November of 1941. In 1958, Mao Zedong's communist government in China unleashed the fateful Great Leap Forward campaign. It was wildly ambitious, with targets notwithstanding. Now, the program swiftly and methodically brought about a nationwide collapse of Chinese agriculture. Instead of immediately redressing the damage they caused, the utopians of China's new dynasty insisted on forcing their experiment forward and made a point of denying relief to the country's desperate presence, thereby vastly and needlessly magnifying the human cost of the tragedy. While a precise count of the victims will never be possible, Western analysis of the official Chinese census figures has indicated that as many as 30 million Chinese perished. Given the choice between dying or eating human flesh, many chose the latter. Often the acts were carried out on the corpses of the dead, but murder did take place as a means to provide sustenance. Parents ate their own kids. Kids ate their own parents. Human meat was traded on the black market, most of it taken from the plentiful dead. Sometimes it was mixed with dog meat to disguise it, and widespread cannibalistic practices of many forms took place on a scale unprecedented in the history of the 20th century. Famine in North Korea has been gripping the countryside ever since the 1990s and has extended into modern times, stemming from economic mismanagement and the loss of Soviet food support. A series of floods, droughts, and government food run confiscation efforts have exasperated the crisis, and undercover reporters and escaping refugees have painted the very grim reality of the cannibalistic practices being hidden from the public eye by the very secretive rogue nation. An unnamed citizen journalist told the Asia Press, which is based in Osaka, Japan, quote, "In my village in May, a man who killed his own 2 children and tried to eat them was executed by a firing squad. While his wife was away on business, he killed his eldest daughter, and because his son had witnessed what he had done, he killed his son as well. When the wife came home, he offered her food, saying, 'We have meat.'" The Asia Press also reported of a man who unearthed his deceased grandson to consume the remains. Following a 2011 interview, Kim Hae-suk recounted her experiences of a 28-year prison sentence in a North Korea concentration camp. She managed to escape in 2003 and told of brutal executions, starvation, and mothers eating their own children, stating that was a regular occurrence. Suk recalled a mother boiling her 9-year-old daughter, while another woman killed her 16-year-old son, chopped him up, and took the remains to a butcher to exchange for corn. 230 North Korean defectors interviewed by the Korean Institute for National Unification told of witnessing executions of people who had either eaten or sold human flesh. Sungmin Jeong, who escaped North Korea in March 2011 and then fled to Australia, stated that in a city called Chongjin, which is at the tip of the North Korean coast, a shopkeeper served up human meat, and his fear was that if he did not take steps to leave North Korea, he would have become a North Korean who had no choice but to eat human flesh. A defected military officer who fled with his family to China repeated the horror story that had long followed mass famines by stating, quote, "People are going insane with hunger. They even kill and eat their own infants. This kind of thing is happening in many places." The United Nations World Food Program requested access to the farmers market where human meat was allegedly traded, but government officials denied the request by citing it was for, quote, "security reasons." Now, when viewing the totality of the evidence, a mere preponderance of the information presents several truths. First truth is that the production, processing, and shipment of food supplies to the marketplace is very easily disrupted by both natural and man-made disasters. Assistance by government may not be available, and in fact, government may be the instigator of the problem. Human behavior during such occurrences induce a higher rate of inventory turnover, as panic buying and hoarding ensues, leading to further shortages as no restoration of balance to the marketplace can occur. Food security and the veneer of public order coexist, with chaos emerging when the public is predicting food deprivation or the existence of starvation is already a clear and present danger. Little to no regard will be given concerning the ethics, morals, religious beliefs, or the law by those who are starving, performing whatever actions they deem necessary, which can include theft, assault, or murder, to end their hunger by the obtainment of food. And in the absence of food, cannibalism will emerge, consuming the already dead or preying upon the living. Now, there are those who would refute and ignore all of this very easily referenced and documented evidence with accusations to the contrary, which encompass a wide variety of flawed logic and ignorance. Remove the easily accessed and readily available food supply to a society, and chaos will emerge. History, current events, research, and logic have proven these skeptics and naysayers wrong. However, they believe what they believe and they claim what they claim while having full stomachs and food no further away than their kitchen, a grocery store, or restaurant. Now, it's a sad fact that those who choose to remain willfully ignorant due to whatever reason will be the ones left unprepared and suffering in the event of a disaster. And if you are one of the unprepared, will you be able to look at yourself in the mirror or face your family during times of strife, having to admit your foolishness for lack of proper planning? Because what will you do next? Will you sit idly by in your home, suffering day by day and awaiting death by starvation? Well, of course not. You will leave your home and do whatever it takes to obtain your next meal in an environment where food is scarce, only solidifying and verifying the statement in which we are only 9 meals away from anarchy. You will be exposed to and contending with and competing against other desperate people such as yourself who will not give a second thought to making you a victim. Now, humanity can be capable of great compassion and generosity in times of need, but also great violence and atrocities when they are fighting for their very own survival. I mean, there will always be someone or group of people, whether good or evil, who are always stronger, faster, smarter, better equipped, better prepared, or better trained than you are. And if you intend to victimize others as a means to sustain yourself, the inevitable chance encounter with one of these people, or just bad luck in general, will end your wave of terror by extinguishing your life. If you have a family or other dependents, well, you've now just made their lives all the more difficult in your absence. Now, hunger is a very powerful, motivating force in which none of us are immune to, and it cannot be ignored. Any person, regardless of age, gender, social status, economic class, religious beliefs, or political affiliations, will eventually resort to unlawful, unethical, and immoral actions when faced with starvation. It has occurred in the past, it is occurring now, it will occur in the future. The only question that you must ask yourself is if you will choose to take personal responsibility to safeguard your lives by being prepared, or endure potentially catastrophic consequences if you do not. That choice is yours. Thanks for watching.